here's the deal with misandry. That is, the hatred of men. Misandry is misogyny's fraternal twin. The same thing, opposite polarity. And I don't want to belabor this point because that could get very tedious and very irritating. But if you don't think misandry exists, ask yourself this. Do you think there are women out there that are afraid of men? And we all know that fear leads to hate, just like Yoda says. Now, to understand the deal with misandry, we have to start with Superman. See, Superman is the man that nothing hurts. Not physically. And he's a great representation of the ideal man because men are supposed to be invulnerable. It's a myth that we perpetuate, but it's a myth that we're taught. You're not allowed to admit that you're suffering, you're not allowed to ask for help, you're not allowed to cry, you're not allowed to talk about complicated emotions. You're supposed to just buck up and take it. And while this myth is largely reinforced by other men, women buy into it too. And this creates a toxic situation when combined with the often quite legitimate reasons an individual woman might have for not trusting men. Because men will always be attracted to them. Men are always a danger to them. And yet, if they're heterosexual, they're also attracted to men. So they're in a bind, and that can often come out as anger towards men. That frustration, the fear, the mistrust, everything. But the thing is, because women are much more sophisticated emotionally and socially than men are, their hate comes out in different ways. Actual physical abuse against men, in the way that we think of physical abuse against women, is relatively rare, although you have to admit, pay attention to female-male relationships in television and movies, and you'll notice that it's far more acceptable for a woman to get angry at a guy and smack him on the arm or give him a little punch or poke or shove than the other way around. Why? Well, because we're supposed to be invulnerable, right? Because women are more sophisticated, they can hurt men in ways that are more subtle and harder to prove, especially if the man is less socially and verbally skillful than her. So, misandrist abuse tends to come out in the form of more of a psychological torture than physical. In a lot of relationships, despite what popular culture tells you is supposed to be the traditional role, in a lot of relationships the woman is completely dominant. And that's because when it comes to an interpersonal thing, like a romantic relationship, women have all the power and skill, and women can therefore be totally in control. Physically dominating somebody is completely irrelevant when it comes to a modern romantic relationship. It hardly ever would come up, and if it does, it's probably a pretty screwed up relationship. So an abusive woman will not look like an abusive man. In fact, sometimes she may even be able to make herself look like the victim. And what she's doing is she's controlling the man by constantly shifting the ground underneath him, psychologically speaking, and manipulating him with semi-false vulnerability. I know no one likes to admit that that really happens, but it does. Misandry in popular culture tends to come out in more sophisticated ways too. It tends to be the presumption that men are dumb and ignorant and more animalistic, and women are saintly and patient and should be given a medal for just putting up with them. No matter how you look at it, that's a pretty sexist assumption. Thank you, Tim Allen. Another note on misandry. Remember that whatever you say about men, you are saying about every man in the world, and that includes your father, your brothers, and the sons you may one day have. Think about that. Think about what you're saying before you go jumping off the deep end with hate. Gloria Steinem once brilliantly defined feminism as the radical idea that women are people. I would add simply that all men's rights is the radical idea that we are people too. And that means that we have the same vulnerabilities, foibles, imperfections, and things like that that women do. We may not be as good at expressing it. Doesn't mean that we're failures as men. That would be just as sexist and wrong a conclusion to come to as the idea that if a woman can't cook and doesn't like babies, she's a failure as a woman. These outdated gender roles have to be thrown away for everybody. And that means for men too. It works both ways. And that, more or less, is the deal with misandry.